Well, it's lovely to be with you. Sue and I have been suffering from chest infections for the past 5 weeks, and we too were at the carnival yesterday. So if everything packs up, well, we'll just call it a day and move on from there. The carnivals are fascinating things for me. It's something that I'm coming to terms. For those of you who don't know, late diagnosis autism, and I go to the carnival because Luke and Wilf want to go, and they want Grandad and Nanny to come with them. And I said, Luke, you see, Luke's my son. Hayden is my eldest grandson. Thank you, Vicky. By the way, Vicky's going to count how many times I said, did you know? So if I say it, wave your hands, I won't say it again. And it puzzles me. I have ear defenders, really good industrial ear defenders. I put them on, I pull my hood up, I turn to the side as these things go past. And the noise! I cannot understand what on earth is going on. And I was talking to Sue on the way back yesterday after we queued for about 3 years to get out of the car park because they decided to change the whole road process. What do people get out? She said they're having fun, they're enjoying themselves, it's just something to come together. There's a good atmosphere, and I'm saying, I don't get it, and I still don't understand it. But I'm there, and I'll go along as Hayden and Wilf want me to, I'll be there. It was good to see Carl, it was good to see the Blake's coaches. It was interesting to be there. So, this year, Sue and I took the family. Well, we didn't take the old dears, as we call them. We didn't take the 96-year-old, the 94-year-old, the 90-year-old, and the 86-year-old. I'm talking from us ancients downwards. We took them away to Cornwall for a week to, it was billed as a cottage, but it was a socking great house, really, with a huge big garden. It had 4 or 5 bathrooms, 4, wasn't it? And a big spa and loads of stuff in the garden, and the garden was big enough to throw a frisbee as hard as you could and it still didn't go out the garden, and a donkey at the end of it was lovely. We really had a good time, and for once the sun shone. Now when Sue and I go away on holiday on our own, it rains. We tried to go away to Stratford upon Avon for a little while to try and just rest. No, it rained non-stop. We were only going for 3 days. We came back on the second one and gave up. We were soaking wet. The dog was wet. The dog was bored. We were stuck in a travel lodge room. The travel lodge was really noisy. We came home. But the holiday was brilliant until the day we came home. Now, we had arranged, Luke and Ali and the girls were going straight home because they live just outside of Exeter. But we arranged with Vicky and Mike and the boys, we'll meet you in Tavistock for a cup of coffee, and then we'll all drive up to this lovely inn that we found on Widdicombe in the Moor, and we'll have lunch, and then we'll go home from there. Some of you are going, oh yeah, I know where that is. So Sue and I set off. Mike had to go and get some diesel, that was fine. And then we got a phone call. Hayden's been sick. Okay, but the reason we're ringing, we've got 2 flat tyres. Great. We've rung the RAC. They'll be here in about 3 hours' time. Okay, so we drank our coffees, turned around, drove back to Gunnis Lake. Yeah. And offloaded some of our luggage and unloaded Vicky and the boys, and off we set. Mike waited for the RAC. The RAC came. They towed him to, well, they didn't tow him. They jacked up the car somehow and took him to a local garage and did the tyres. And by this time, we'd reached Widdicombe in the Moor, and we thought, okay, everything's sorted out. Then we get a phone call from Mike later on, after we've dropped Vicky and the boys home. I've got another flat tyre. So he rang the RAC, and the RAC said, well, we've been out for this once already, so we won't come out again. And he said, but I've had them replaced. Okay, well, send in a copy of your invoice, and we'll think about it. So, modern day things, scan, email, done. They ring back, yes, no problem, we're coming. By now it's, about 7:30 at night, and they said, we'll be there by 12:30 a.m. So back out I went to where Mike was and loaded on all the stuff that Vicky and the boys needed for that night and left him and the dog. And the RAC came. They towed him to the equivalent garage in Taunton, parked the car out there. Back out I went, picked Mike up and all the rest of the stuff, took him home. By now we're talking about midnight. So we thought that was the end of this journey home and, what an end to the holiday. But no, that wasn't the end to it. About 4 days later, a lovely brown envelope dropped through my letterbox. I'd been done for speeding. I was doing 37 miles an hour. I was caught by one of these new things. Be careful, Devon and Cornwall employ mobile AI, artificial intelligence cameras. I don't know what they work out, but apparently I'd come out with a 40 mile an hour limit into a 30. I hadn't seen a 30 mile an hour sign, and I was doing 37. Well, I was slowing down, but no, you can't argue with them. That's what the cameras said. You either have 3 points on your licence, pay £100 fine, or you do a speed awareness course. Was anybody brave enough to admit it? Yeah, look at all the hands. No, don't look at me. Don't embarrass people. Speed awareness course. 4-hour Zoom call with 9 other people, one of whom was driving. I'd have failed him. I would have failed him instantly, but no, the guy who was from Wales, he said, well, look, if you were driving the actual car and not I can't do the accent, not the passenger, I would have failed you. He was driving, because the guy said to him, are you driving? No, I'm a passenger in the car. Well, why are the trees flying past the right-hand side of your head? Oh, pardon? Just a minute, you've broken up. And he parked. I don't know what was the matter with him. We could all see on Zoom. He got out of the car, he walked round the car, he got in the passenger side and said, oh, I can hear you again now. And the rest of us paid our fine and we did our course. And there was one young lady who'd been driving for a massive 2 months and had been done already. They're good. They are good. If you have to do one, do it. I would thoroughly recommend it. I learned all about the new speed limits on dual carriageways. There's new speed limit? There is. Look them up. But lawyers, don't you just love them? £100 fine. If I didn't do that, I'd get points. If I didn't accept those, I'd be taken to court. Now, when I used to work in the council, well, up until about 2.5, 3 years before I finished at the council, I used to ride a moped, scooter moped, one of those, to work every day. And apart from coming off twice in the snow, that was fine, it was a soft landing, I was coming down up, North Street, is it so? Where, turning around, and those cobbles, splat. I went straight down, bang! And these lovely people came belting over, two ladies, actually, are you all right? I said, well, yeah, I think so. You weren't going very fast. No, I was only doing 10 miles an hour. Splat. Are you sure you're all right? Do you want an ambulance? No, I think I'm all right. I'll just get back on the scooter and went in, parked the car, went up to my desk, and my then manager said, you all right? Look a bit, I said, well, I've just come off my bike. I sort of landed on my knee. Better just have a look at it. And I pulled up my leggings and my trouser, and he nearly passed out. He went boom, straight down on his seat. There for all to see was my kneecap. How many of you have seen your kneecap from the inside? It's fascinating. Anyhow, they took me to the hospital. The hospital washed it all out, put 18 stitches in, crutches for 2 weeks. It was all right. But the point is, people rushed over to help. And if I'd let them help and not allowed my pride to get in the way, if I'd actually let them say, well, look, let's just sit here for a minute. Don't worry about the bike. We'll pick it up. We'll get someone to come and look at it. Then I wouldn't have ended up with quite such a big scar, perhaps. I'm not going to show it to you now. Come and ask if you want to see it, and I'll say no. I don't know what happened. I just came off it. And 2 people came over, 2 Good Samaritans came over to see if I was all right. And I thought I was, but I wasn't. I could have done with their help. I did try to pursue it with the council that your cobbles aren't safe for bikes. And one of these win or pay nothing firms took it up, and their barrister said, you haven't got a hope of winning, so let's drop it, and that was the end of that. Apparently it has to be 2 inches wide and 2 inches deep before they'll do anything about it, and they couldn't find a cobble. Anyway, lawyers, eh? Who'd love them? So lawyers and Good Samaritans, some examples of both. Did you know that it's the only one, Vix. Colonel Saunders of Kentucky Fried Chicken, he was a lawyer until one day he lost his temper in court and assaulted a client. Different sort of battering, you might say. But he then went on to be a fried chicken person. Lawyers, who'd have them? So what's this all about? Well, let's look at the passage that we've had read to us, Luke chapter 10. Now, over this series of parables, we've had good explanations of what a parable is and some clear examples of how Jesus uses them to teach. And today's parable, perhaps you could press the next button, Carl, and just bring up a picture of the Good Samaritan, thank you, follows some interesting events. Jesus has sent out 72 disciples in pairs to go ahead of him into every town and every place that he was about to go. You'll find that in verse 1, I believe, of chapter 10. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to go to every town and place where he was about to go. They were sent out like lambs to the slaughter. They were sent out to preach God's word. They were sent out to heal the sick, to deliver people from demon possession. They were told to go into any town that welcomed them and to literally and figuratively shake the dust off their feet from the towns that wouldn't listen to them. Scared though they were at the outset, they came back with some fantastic news. People had listened. People had been healed. God has been with us. Wonderful. But Jesus, he'd been to Chorazin, which is only mentioned here in the New Testament, and Bethsaida, and nobody responded. How do we know that? Because Jesus pronounces woe on them. Now, it's not a curse. He just says, alas. That's really what it is. Because if, and he names other places like Tyre and Sidon, if they had heard and seen what you have heard and seen, they would have repented. How incredibly sad it is that these people had actually seen Jesus, listened to him, maybe seen some of his miracles, and had not repented. So before we consider what we can actually learn from the parable, let us ask ourselves if we have repented. So what does it mean? It means simply, have you turned around from your old ways to face Jesus and accept him as your Saviour? Have you given up the old ways and started to follow? If not, then you're going to perhaps struggle to do some of what this parable requires you to do. If you have, it's still a fight, but hopefully you've already coloured in those 20 helping hands. I counted them quickly while Lauren was holding them up in the past week. Have you given your life to Christ? So, Carl, can we have the next slide? You'll have to click it twice. Have you missed one, or have I got myself around the wrong way? Where's the one of the lawyer? Oh. I've probably done it wrong. I wouldn't be at all, it doesn't matter. They're not essential, they're just literal sort of pictures, really. So we come to the point where a lawyer stands up, an expert in the law, and he stands up to test Jesus, and he says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, it seems to me to be a genuine question. He seems to be asking sincerely. Maybe he isn't. Now, we stand beyond the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus, and so we know immediately, as I've just been saying, what we need to do to inherit eternal life. But at the time that this lawyer is speaking, Jesus is still alive, he's still on earth, he hasn't died, he hasn't been resurrected, he hasn't ascended to heaven. And so Jesus says to him, well, what's written in the law? And then he says, how do you read it? So if we ask ourselves this morning, what is written in the law, how would you read it? How would you answer it? Do we think of it as unnecessary and inappropriate, even inapplicable, because we now stand beyond the resurrection and ascension of Christ? Interesting. I have heard that argument even recently. Well, we're New Testament believers, we can question what the Old Testament says. But if you look at the law, the English law, at the moment, as it stands, most of it is based on what? Yes, thank you, Graham. I thought I'd just ask that to wake you up a little bit. Exodus 20. Today, of course, how far do we go with this? We deal with a lack of absolutes. Now, the Ten Commandments are very clear. You will not commit murder. You will not commit adultery. Simple, straightforward. But once you start saying, oh, well, of course, what does adultery mean? And start taking it apart and start saying, well, your understanding of adultery might be different to my understanding of adultery, and we lose the absolutes, then we've lost it all. And people don't have absolutes today. They don't. They don't believe that something is either right or wrong. Again, being autistic, that's how I see things, black and white, and I need to be taught a lot about the grey areas. But where the law's concerned, you were doing 37 miles an hour. It doesn't matter that you didn't see the 30-mile-an-hour sign. It doesn't matter that you were braking and slowing down. You will pay the £100 fine, full stop, and do a course. And in that course, they teach you how to know when you're in a 30-mile-an-hour limit where there are no signs. See me afterwards. So can you imagine now, what would the Lord Jesus say to you if he were here and he said, how do you read the law? And what are you going to do about it? What would your answer be? We cannot plead on our own behalf. We cannot try to justify ourselves, because if we're honest and we look at ourselves, we're horrible. We do all kinds of horrible things. We don't do anything in our own strength good enough to be given eternal life. We cannot self-justify ourselves. Is that correct grammar? We've all sinned. We've all gone astray. We cannot do anything in our own strength. There is no righteousness of any of us by our own strength. But here we are. We're to love our neighbours wholeheartedly. I was looking in the mirror this morning and I thought, who's looking back at me? Who is that old man with a wobbly neck that he never had? Who is that one that's lost all the hair on top of his head? And I'm told from my wife when she cuts it that it's disappearing upwards from the back as well. Who is he? Do you ever look at yourself and think, oh, Lord, what is going on? The years fly by. But also we can look at ourselves and think, I've done it again. I've got it wrong. I've sinned again. We cannot justify ourselves. But this lawyer, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. Jesus has said to him, do this, you'll live. And he said, well, hang on a minute, I want to justify myself. Who is my neighbour? I looked up self-justification, and in the dictionary it says, it is the act or an instance of justifying or providing excuses for one's behaviour. Now, remember, this is a lawyer. You can almost hear the sense of pomposity coming out from the very words themselves. And then, just who is my neighbour? I put it to you. Yeah, you can see, you can hear it, can't you? I suppose if you look at a court of law, a lawyer must appear very sure of themselves. They must appear that they know what's going on as they seek to find a loophole and challenge the court as to whether or not this person is guilty. So here he is, feeling quite as though he has found something, and he's going to challenge Jesus with it. And he says, who is my neighbour? How often do we find ourselves attempting to justify our actions? I was only doing 37, honestly. Does an attempt at justification mean that we feel we may have gone a bit too far in some way or another? Or have we been accused by somebody of doing something and we need to justify just why we did or did not do it? Or perhaps worse still, we're trying to prove how clever we are, and therefore somebody else to be foolish. So he says, and who is my neighbour? Now, in answer to this, Jesus doesn't give a straightforward answer, but a story. Now, can you just raise your hand, please? Have you heard the parable of the Good Samaritan preached on before? Twice? Keep your hands up, don't put them down. 5 times? 10 times? You've lost count of the number of times. Yeah. That's the trouble with parables, and particularly the Good Samaritan. They are so often preached on, but there's a reason for this. They have a great application to our own lives. So here we have a story from Jesus which completely confronts the expected norms. What happens? A man's attacked by robbers, and Lauren showed that to us very clearly, and Colin dressed up for us in that lovely balaclava. And he's attacked by robbers in a desolate place, and he's left to die. Can we have the next slide, I think, just so we can see a picture? Keep clicking, there we go. A priest and a Levite. And you might as well bring the other one up as well, the next picture. There we go, thank you. Just pictures of the differences of what they look like, slightly. Now, if I'm coming here to speak on a Sunday morning, and I know I have to be here at the very latest by 25 past so I can get the microphone fitted on, and if I can, I'd like to be here before that because I like to join in with a prayer meeting beforehand, and my next door neighbour knocks on the door and he says, look, I've got a flat, can you just help me pump it up? Well, if you're quick, or I'm driving along and I see a nasty accident and somebody needs help, well, what do you do? That's a little bit easier when you have somebody leading the service for you. You can let them sweat and worry and deal with the instance and arrive late. But if you're doing the whole thing, it's not so easy. Now, the priest was on his way. The man looked half dead. What do the ceremonial laws say about a priest and dead people? Some people have read their Old Testament. You mustn't touch a dead body. Well, he looks dead. I can't go and prod him. I mean, in our first aid courses at work, that I don't know how many of them I did, they just seem to be refreshing us every so many months. it changed over the period of time as how you check whether somebody's passed out or not. At first, you pinch the earlobes, but people sue them for damage to their ears. So then you shake them by the shoulders, but people sued them for damage to their head. So then you shout at them, but he might be deaf. How do you have to do something to them physically to see if they're conscious or unconscious. He's laying there half dead. The priest is fulfilling his duty. He's going somewhere to act as a priest. He can't touch him. So he bypasses him over the other side of the road so that he can't be contaminated by association, and on he goes. And then a Levite comes along, and the same thing happens. He can't touch him because he too will be defiled, and he doesn't want to be, so he crosses it, and on he goes. So they're doing what they're told to do. They're following the law. How many times when you drive along at 30 miles an hour, as I discover more and more these days, in a 30-mile-an-hour limit, does the person behind practically drive on your petrol fumes? But you're following the law. Do you know, I failed my driving test the first time. Failure to go at the speed of the traffic. I was doing 30 in a 30. The law is an ass. Sorry, I don't want to get bound up with the law. So the priest and the Levite left this half-dead man. I mean, you could also think, well, perhaps they were scared the robbers would return, and so they pegged it out of there quickly. Now, if we follow the usual thought pattern, what actually happens in an Israelite's mind is that first you've got the priest, then you've got the Levite, and they've both bypassed him. Now Jesus is going to bring in an ordinary Israelite and he'll help him. And everything will be hunky-dory, lovely jubbly, thank you very much, Bain Marie. It would all be sorted out lovely. But he doesn't. He brings in a Samaritan. Now, if this were a pantomime, you'd have boo, he's behind you. You'd have all those sorts of things going on. Jesus brings in a Samaritan. The Samaritans are hated by the Israelites. You can hear the boos and the hisses and the sharp intake of breath. It's a Samaritan. What's going to happen? Who were the Samaritans? What's the significance of that? Now, I'm sure those of you who've heard it more than 10 times know, but let's just do a very brief piece of history. In 721 BC, the northern territory, by this time Israel had split into the north and south and had their separate kings and so on. And the northern kingdom, despite being warned lots of times by all kinds of prophets, succumbed to the Assyrians. And the Assyrians took many of their people off back to Assyria as captives. Back to Assyria, anyway, you know what I mean, back to their towns as captives. A few remained. And they intermarried with the foreigners that the Assyrians brought in. It's a very good way of taking over land. If you conquer the land, you take all the indigenous native people out and you put your own people in there. And suddenly it's very much your land, and the people you've taken out become slaves. These half-Jewish, half-Gentiles living in the northern kingdom became known as Samaritans. And then in 586 BC, the southern kingdom of Judah fell to the Babylonian Empire once and for all. The walls of Jerusalem were breached, the temple was destroyed, the city walls were torn down, and foreigners moved in. And they were known as Samaritans because they came down and they lived in what was supposed to be Israel's capital. Samaritans are first mentioned in the Bible in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah in the 5th century BC. At this point, Babylon had given way to the Persian Empire. Nehemiah, a Jew, had been living in Babylon, and he had worked his way up, currying favor with, forgotten the name of the king. Eric, who's the king? Artaxerxes? That doesn't matter. With the king at that time, and don't look it up, Vicky, you'll embarrass me. And he'd worked his way up. And he was able, you need to look the story up yourself if you want all the details, to return to Jerusalem to rebuild it. So he gets together all these people and back he goes, and he takes a great time to get there, and he surveys it and he looks around and he thinks, we can rebuild this. And then all of a sudden, the Samaritans protest. No, we don't need it rebuilded. Rebuilded. I'm talking Old Testament now. We don't need it rebuilt. We're fine with it. It just shows, we're the foreigners. We occupy this place now. And Nehemiah faced an awful lot of opposition. So the Jews hated the Samaritans. What? Thank you. It was Artaxerxes. Huh. Getting old, but there's still a kernel of something working there. So the Jews hated the Samaritans. Now, in this story, along comes a Samaritan, and Jesus' listeners were probably expecting the Samaritan, once they got used to that idea, he's going to finish him off, take what's left, and dump the body in the rocks, and Bob's your uncle. Instead, he rescues him. He cares for him. He puts him on his own donkey. He took him to a hostel or hotel, and he paid for him. I'm popping a lot. Let me just move the microphone down a little bit. Thank you. And he paid for him to be tended for and cared for and looked after. And he said, I'll pay even more when I come back in a few days if you need to spend any more money on him. And what makes it even more heard of is that it is assumed that the man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho is an Israelite. And so these hated people actually helped an Israelite. So I suppose the equivalent today might be a Palestinian looking after a Jew who'd been beaten up as a result of the war. And Jesus says to the lawyer, well, who do you think was that man's neighbour? And he says, well, I suppose the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus utters his final words on this matter. Go and do likewise. Just think for a minute. Do likewise. We've all met people we can't stand. We've probably all had people that that have really hurt us. We've probably all got people that we try very hard not to consider as enemies. How do we feel about helping them? What about when it costs us financially or costs us our time? Or when we're utterly exhausted? Or interrupts what we had planned for the day? We were walking the dog at the canal the other day. And, this old man had the audacity to faint in front of us and fall onto the barbed wire and the bushes and disappear completely from sight. It took an hour for the ambulance to get there. And when they arrived, they turned up exactly where I told them not to, the other side of the canal, and said, we just wanted to walk the dog. We just wanted to get home because we've got things to do, bit of housework, this, that, and the other, cup of coffee, nice biscuit. And this person, fortunately, he fell to his left and not to his right, because if he'd gone in the canal, well, then I really might have thought twice about jumping in and pulling him out. But he'd gone into the bushes, and I tell you, it took two of us. There was a lady walking past with her dog, and I can't pick him up. Can you give me a hand? And between the two of us, we picked it, and he was pouring. And anyway, an ambulance came, and he was fine. I kept asking him, are you on any new medication? Because it looks to me like your blood pressure's dropped. No, I'm not. Anyway, he rang the next day. He'd just been put on new blood pressure medication, and it was too strong, and his blood pressure had dropped. And anyway, he was fine. He even went to the football that afternoon, so he was fine. But it interrupts us. It stops us doing what we want to do sometimes to be a good neighbour. But Jesus says, go and do likewise. So if we're not sure about who our neighbour is, let me just read to you a few examples from Facebook that Sue gathered together for me of non-Christian Good Samaritans. My hubby and I would like to thank the two ladies that helped our son this morning when he fell off his bike. I'm sorry I didn't get your names and don't think I thanked you at the time. He's okay, a little bit bruised and scratched, and he's got an emergency dentist appointment tomorrow to sort the broken tooth out. Thank you both again for helping him. Hi everyone, I just wanted to post to hopefully get a message to a certain group of people. I was travelling today and stopped off on my way. Well, I never actually made it back to the car after visiting the shops because I slipped in the car park and I heard a crack. And as soon as I hit the deck, two lovely ladies came rushing over to see if I was okay. There was also another lady who came to help who said she worked in the hospital. I think that's what she said. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you so much for looking after me, calling an ambulance, phoning my family, holding umbrellas over me as the rain poured, and so much more. You are all amazing human beings. I'd like to thank everyone else who also stopped and offered help, asking if I needed blankets or a first aid kit. I know I was sobbing the whole time, but I knew you were there, and I'm so grateful. I'm back home with a sprained ankle and crutches. Thank you again. Oh yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to the people who stopped to help me while I was stranded on the zebra crossing due to my malfunctioning powered wheelchair and helped me get moving. They literally got out of their cars to help whilst others sat there beeping at me. Ironically, I ended up stuck between the petrol station and Quick Fit before my chair started again, but my wheelchair decided to be a diva and just stopped working. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you all. Thank you. Huge thank you and a search for the lovely lady who took my daughter to hospital after she was involved in a serious car accident on Friday. I know we met briefly at the hospital, but I'd like to thank you properly. Your kindness to my daughter that night means absolutely everything to me. Thank you for acting so quickly, for being there for her, for consoling her, for getting her to hospital so quickly. She and her friend are extremely lucky to only have walked away with severe concussion and whiplash. Really hope you see this. Who is my neighbour? How do I go and do likewise?
Thank you.